Divorces are expensive. If you're in the process of getting divorced or thinking about getting divorced, you know that. You've likely researched it online, you've seen what it costs. What I'm going to share with you today in this video is how I saved 77% off the nationwide average in the United States of a contested divorce. That's how much I saved with my divorce that was finalized earlier this year. And I'm going to share with you all of my best tips and a few pitfalls I want you to avoid while going through your divorce. Hi, I'm Jeff Campbell from DivorcedParentsClub.com, and I'm on a mission to help other people who are going through a divorce navigate these troubled waters that we now find ourselves in. But for now, let's talk about the cost of divorce and how you can save a lot of money. So the average cost in the United States of a contested divorce is $15,000. What do I mean by contested? That means you two don't agree. That means you've each got your own lawyers and you're fighting head to head and just getting ugly. Now, if it actually goes to trial, then that actually is even more expensive. It can be $20,000 or $30,000 at that point. I don't want you to do that. At the end of the day, you don't want to just give all of that money to lawyers and then end up hating each other. And if you've got kids, you still have to deal with each other for years to come, if not the rest of your life. You don't want to spend that time with somebody that you hate. Let's be honest. You're splitting up. You don't have to love each other anymore, but you don't want to hate each other either. And there is a way to accomplish all of those goals. Then let's talk about the time it takes for a contested divorce. The average amount of time it takes from start to finish in the United States is somewhere between 12 and 18 months. That's crazy. My divorce from start to finish took about 3 months. And again, we spent 77% less than we normally would have in a normal contested divorce. So how much did I spend on my divorce? Again, my divorce was finalized earlier this year after my now ex-wife asked for a divorce in April of 2021. How much did we spend? We spent about $3,500, $3,500, far less than those figures I mentioned earlier, the $15,000 for the average contested divorce and the $23,000 divorce if it goes to trial. We spent far less than that, and the rest of this video is going to kind of detail for you how we did that. Real quick though, if you like this video and you want to see more videos like it, go ahead and click that like button, then smash the subscribe button and the bell notification button too. That way you get notified of future videos that I put out, and YouTube will show you more videos that it knows you're going to like, and it also helps me grow my channel. So how did our divorce work, and how did we end up saving so much money? We started by emailing back and forth, my now ex-wife and I used email intentionally because I didn't want there to be anything possibly lost in a verbal conversation, especially if there's a little bit of tension, and there's naturally going to be because you're getting divorced. It's better to have the clarity of the written word. That way there's an exact record of what you said and what they said, and there's no misunderstanding of that, there's no misinterpreting that, there's no remembering it incorrectly. So I encourage you to do all of your communication in writing, and for us, email was just a little easier to do than text because some of it was quite lengthy. So what we did was send a series of emails back and forth suggesting what we wanted on certain topics. What were those topics? Well, things like child support, child custody agreements and arrangements, and who was having the kids on when, and vacation time, major holidays, things like that. We also ironed out agreements on significant others because she was already dating somebody or about to start dating somebody that she was talking to, and I knew eventually I would do the same, and we wanted to have that mapped out in the agreement as well, as far as when would we introduce them to the kids and things like that. Unfortunately, in my case, because I am a blogger and a YouTuber and I started that business while we were married, she was actually entitled to technically up to half of the value of that business. It's a little hard to ascertain the value of a business like that since it's not brick and mortar, so we kind of had to guess and estimate and things like that, but coming to an agreement on that was definitely something we did as well. Then we also had to deal with our house. We owned a house together, and I ended up buying her out of the house, and the amount of money that she agreed to for that and all of that, that was built into the agreement as well, as were our overall finances, our bank account, retirements account, things like that. We also mapped out what was going to happen with our belongings. Obviously, we know that what you bring into the marriage, in other words, what you acquired before getting married, is obviously yours, but most of what we had was stuff that we had collected together. Now, with regards to things like holidays, we did agree to spend those holidays together as a family in our house. Now, at that time, we weren't really thinking about significant others and things like that and how that might play into it. We did have an agreement in there that no one would spend the night with the kids in a house unless they were married. But we didn't really think about, well, what happens Christmas Eve? You know, if we're engaged to somebody or have a serious relationship with somebody, can they spend the night Christmas Eve and then be there for Christmas morning? We didn't really think about things like that. So there are some things like that I'm going to cover a little bit later in the video that we forgot about, that we didn't think about, that I want you to think about for your agreement if you follow this same path. So how did it work with the lawyer? Well, what the lawyer did, and I hired the lawyer. I went to the lawyer just as a consultation to get his opinion on the situation. Then we emailed our agreement to him that we had finalized and completely agreed to, and he began to draft it up in legal documents. And some of the things that we had asked for, he said couldn't actually be included in the divorce decree, but could be included as an addendum, and all of it would be basically signed off on by the judge. That was fine with us. We didn't really care. We just wanted what we had agreed to in our document that we emailed to him. We wanted all of that to be included in the divorce decree. Then I went and met with him, and we had like another 1-hour consultation where he kind of went over what he had done, but he also had a lot of questions, and he also suggested some things that he thought needed clarification that we hadn't thought about. So then he drafted up a more finalized version of the agreements, emailed them back to me. I in turn forwarded them to my ex. We reviewed those, we made a few changes, and then we basically sent back a finalized version. They sent that back to us for signatures and then back off for the judge's signature. All of that from start to finish took, like I said, about 10 weeks or so. Not a terribly long process. At least in Texas where we live, I was told that the judge will pretty much sign anything as long as both parties are in agreement. That makes it an uncontested divorce. That's the primary difference that I was talking about earlier. When contested means you each have lawyers and you're fighting basically tooth and nail to make sure that you get everything that you want at the expense of the other person. We didn't want to go that route. In fact, when we hammered out our final agreement, we actually took my laptop to a winery. We had lunch there, and then we had some wine, and we just kind of knocked it out. And we didn't want to end up hating each other. And trust me, you don't want that either if you have kids, because you're going to be dealing with this person for the rest of your life, and you don't want to hate them. You don't want there to be lingering animosity and anger every time you see them and every interaction you have with them. I have friends who have relationships like that with their exes, and trust me, it is just not worth it. So do this the right way, do it the thoughtful way. You don't want to get screwed, but you don't want to screw the other person either. Ideally, you want to work together to find a way to just sort of navigate how this is going to move forward in a way where everybody kind of gets what they want, at least to a degree. So I mentioned that there were a few things that we thought about later that we really should have included in our agreement. So I'm going to go over those for you now so that if you're going this route, you can make sure and cover those in your agreement. So first of all, I want to point out, we put into our agreement that you had to wait 6 months before introducing a significant other to the kids. And we since have both kind of verbally agreed to modify that down to 3 months. We sort of felt like 6 months was a little too lengthy. In her case, she actually started dating and is now pretty much living with a guy that she's been friends with for 7 years, who was already a family friend. And so that kind of complicated the whole situation to begin with. And that was one of the reasons that we were like, well, there's not really a reason to wait 6 months, but if she doesn't have to wait 6 months, then why should I? I would think about that. I would think about how long is a reasonable amount of time to wait from the time that you or your ex start seriously seeing one person. Obviously, you don't want to have a bunch of people coming and going out of the kids' lives. That was the impetus for our agreement originally, but we did modify that. Then you have to think about Are they ever going to sleep in the house when the kids are there? And we put it into our agreement that no, unless they were married. But we didn't really think about things like Christmas Eve. If her boyfriend, or soon to be husband, whatever he is, comes over on Christmas Eve, is he going to have to go home and then come back Christmas morning? How is that going to work? So I would think about things like that also. At the time when we drafted that particular clause, I believe that clause came from me, and I was still feeling a little bit of resentment because the divorce was not my choice, and I was starting to become aware of him and his role in her life, and was feeling like maybe there had been something going on there in years past, not really sure. Not the purpose of this video, but there was some lingering anger and resentment on my part, which probably fueled my including that passage in there. I do think it's worth thinking about holidays, how a significant other might spend their time there, and whether or not it's reasonable to have them spend the night in the house. Obviously not in the same bed if you've got young kids, that kind of thing. But it's probably reasonable to think that they would spend the night there Christmas Eve if they're going to be there Christmas morning. Another thing that has come up somewhat recently is think about if you've got kids who are young and who are at like a daycare or a pre-K kind of thing, and they have authorized pickup people, think about who is going to be authorized, and do you both have to be in agreement to add somebody to that pickup list? My ex has added a few people to that list without my knowledge, and it's kind of rubbed me the wrong way to kind of find out after the fact that somebody else, like her boyfriend, is picking up my kid when I am available, and we didn't really spell that out in the agreement. So I'm doing my best to not get angry about that situation and not address it with her. But I do think it's worth spelling that out in the agreement, because the more you spell out in your agreement, the less potential future conflict there will be. So who's authorized to pick up the kids would be high on the list, and making sure that both people have to agree on any name that gets added to that list. So we have a fairly unconventional arrangement as far as the custody goes. The kids don't switch back and forth between her house and my house. They actually live full-time in what is now my house because I bought my ex's equity out of it. But she and I take turns rotating in and out of that house, and we're going to continue to do that until our middle kid graduates high school in about 4 years, or if either one of us gets married. The agreement ends under any of those conditions. We just felt like that was better for the kids to have a consistent home life rather than shuttling back and forth. But if I'm being honest, my two oldest kids would probably choose to live with me full-time if they had to switch back and forth, and legally in Texas they're old enough to make that call. I didn't want to rob them of having their mother in their lives on a regular basis, so I compromised in that regard and agreed to that at my own detriment to a degree. But I am also liking my weeks away from the house because I can get more done. I can shoot videos like this, I can hit the gym more and things like that. So it's kind of a win-win, just a little bit of an unconventional situation. I will say though that within 1 week or so of our agreement being signed off on by the judge, my ex came to me and said she didn't want to continue sharing an apartment with me, because when we rotate out of the house, we're both going to one apartment. Now, we're not there at the same time. There's no overlap. It's a 2-bedroom apartment. She has her room and bathroom, and I have mine. But she came to me like a week after the judge signed the agreement and said she didn't want to do that anymore. But of course, at that point, it was already a done deal, and that's why you want to have as much of this stuff spelled out in the agreement as possible, because then at that point it's like, no, this is what we agreed to, and the judge signed it. Nothing you can do about it, and I'm not willing to change. And that was basically the conversation we had. I did suggest that she could buy me out of the agreement, because if I was going to have to go get my own apartment, which is what she wanted, that would have cost me a lot of money, and I was already paying her a lot of money. And the reason I agreed to the amount of money I was giving her was because out of that money that I was giving her, she was paying for the apartment. And it just didn't make sense for me to suddenly start paying for mortgage and a rent. It just didn't make sense. Not sure why she was going there, but I quelled it quickly because we had already specified that in detail in the agreement, and at that point it had already been signed by the judge. So again, make sure you have every last little detail spelled out in your agreement, because it's just going to prevent future arguments, or at least make them end easily, as it did in my case. I hope this video helps you. If it did, leave me a comment down below and tell me your situation, tell me your story, or tell me a topic you'd like to see covered in a future video. But for now, I'll see you in the next video.